Starting the recording now. Hi, my name is Erica Lee Garcia, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the Engineer in Residence program. This is a program founded by PEO and run by Engineers of Tomorrow. And thank you everyone for joining us on this nice sunny Saturday. We were hoping to get together in person, but that did not turn out to be logistically possible. So we're very glad to be doing this online and seeing so many of you tuning in. It's going to be a great day. We're hopefully going to have some fun and interact with each other today. So about the session you're about to watch, if you're watching the replay or whether you're online, we are going to be talking about just an intro to the program, some goals for the day, to give you an overview of the EIR program, tools and tips, time to connect with your match. We know that that's something that's very important to everyone, and then answer your questions. So let's just keep going through the agenda here. That's basically what we've got. There is going to be a break. We're seeing that the break will be around noon. So if your family are asking when you're going to be off the computer, that is when. And then we'll do a Q&A and wrap up starting at 1 p.m. So we'll be done by easily just right after lunch and have you off onto your day. So first question I wanted to ask, I'm hoping we can do this a little bit interactively, is about the EIR program. I'm sure lots of you, having already gotten involved with the program, know a little bit about it at least. But we wanted to ask you, what's an EIR? What are, you can see some of these people in the photos here. This photo is, I think, 5 to 10 years old at least. You can see the pride in their faces. They're certainly enjoying themselves. What is an EIR? What does that mean to you? Certainly they're a volunteer. They're an engineer or EIT that volunteers their time in the classroom. How would you describe this person, or how do you think about their role? Let's have a few people respond in the chat if you get a chance. What are some thoughts about what an EIR is? I'm asking for interaction right off the bat here. Fantastic. I'm seeing some responses coming in. Engineering ambassador. I really like that one. We agree with that one, that's a really great way to describe the role. And as an ambassador, a lot of people don't know about engineering, even though we're surrounded by engineering every day, all day. People don't recognize it. And so to put a human face to those technologies and those systems that so many of us take for granted, especially in the first world where we have so much technology around us all the time. I have a response here, generous and energetic. That's great to hear. We certainly hope so. Someone to bring in innovation. Great response. Yeah, a role model. Awesome. That is definitely true. First exposure to engineering for kids. I think that's definitely true. I did a very unscientific poll yesterday. I was speaking to an engineering firm that employed a handful of EITs and PEngs, and I asked them, when did you first hear the word engineer? And most of them said, high school, maybe when I was applying for engineering. So we have a lot of opportunity to get the word out earlier and to make sure that kids understand what an engineer is, just so that it's on their radar. How do I message where everyone can see? You need to put put the screen, your little drop-down box, to everyone, chat to everyone. If you don't have that permission, it may be because GoToMeeting isn't letting you. Sorry about that, Michael. But I promise that I'm looking at your responses and I'll make sure that they get repeated to the group. So, okay, we've done some good brainstorming. Thanks everybody for being on board with doing some interaction first thing in the morning. Here are some of our thoughts about what an EIR is, an engineer in residence is. They are certainly a role model. They are showing, they're a living personification of this is what you could be when you grow up. And maybe there are some kids who already know that they want to be an engineer, or some that have never heard of it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You're speaking to and you're setting an example for all of those students. So that's fantastic. Ambassador was something that we heard from the group as well. That's great. Another favorite descriptor of ours in terms of a way to think about the EIR's role is that they're a stereotype breaker. The ideas that are out there about engineering, by and large, are very outdated and terrible and incomplete, and I don't think we want to spend too much time on those stereotypes. We're going to lightly touch on it later. But the fact is that engineers are all sorts of people. They have all sorts of personality types. They have all sorts of interests. They work in all sorts of industries and do all kinds of cool things. So there really isn't one way to describe being an engineer, and we don't want to leave the mistaken impression that if you don't fit that very narrow stereotype that you're not welcome in engineering. That's certainly not true. And I certainly have not found that to be true in my career as an engineer either. We think of them as an ally for teachers. Again, when we talk about working side by side with the teacher, we want to make sure that the message you're sending to the kids is that I'm here to support the teacher. I'm here to help teach the lesson, not to displace the teacher or to sort of override them in any way, but that they're an ally for teachers. And you will begin that conversation. If you haven't already, you're going to begin building that ally relationship now. And now is a great time to start. You're just getting to know each other. You're setting the foundations for your collaboration and how you're going to work together. So making sure that that's really equal. Oh, your chat function's not working. I got your message, Claudio, so I think it is working. They're an engineer who cares. I guess we thought that could maybe be a stem from many different types of caring. An engineer who cares about the future. We hear all the time, I want to give back. I want to pay it forward. I want to make sure that people know about engineering. I've had such a great career in engineering. It's been so rewarding and so positive for me that I want others to know. We hear that all the time. So an engineer who cares is that option. You only have organizer and presenter only chat options. Okay, I apologize for that. Let's keep rolling anyway. I promise I'm looking at the chat box and I'll make sure that the comments get repeated. I can also unmute you at some point a little later in the presentation. If it's okay, I'm going to leave you on mute for now because that is going to just let us get through the presentation material a little bit more quickly. Finally, this is sort of a philosophical, sort of open, open air kind of blue sky definition of an EIR is that they're an example of what's possible. And I think, given that we're saying, well, kids don't know what engineering is, they've never met an engineer, they don't know anyone in their social circles, they don't see it on TV, it hasn't crossed their reality yet. So when you, as the EIR, show up in the classroom, you're really opening up their worldview. You're changing their understanding of what's out there and what's possible for them. So remember that. I think it's a wonderful role to play for someone. It's a wonderful thing that you can do in order to expand their understanding of what the world is at. It's definitely a privilege to be able to participate in that way. And I guess just so you know, I think I've spoken, pardon me, I've spoken to in total hundreds of of classrooms as an engineering volunteer. I've been doing this pretty much since I was a university student. So this is a function I'm very familiar with, and my business partner Rebecca as well. So we're going to introduce ourselves a little bit later. We just wanted to get you thinking a little with that brainstorming exercise. Okay, so on to a more buttoned down, a little more tactical definition of what the EIR program is. It is a volunteer-based program that matches volunteer engineers with teachers across Ontario, and we want to inspire young people. That's basically it. We focus on engineering, but I think that it's fair to say that we are interested in promoting any and all of the STEM professions: science, technology, engineering, and math. And there's even a new acronym I've heard recently, which is science, engineering, technology, and trades. So a little bit of a different spectrum, I guess, being represented there, which is, it's great for young people to understand all the possibilities that are out there and understand that the one that fits them is the one that they should go to. And there's really no one best one or one that everybody should be getting into. So it was a pilot, I guess, just a little twinkle in past President George Comrie's eyes. He was a longtime PEO counselor and past PEO president who had an associate of his in the education community who decided that they wanted to try out this program, and they started it as a pilot in 1997, believe it or not, a good 20 years ago, prior to all sorts of things which we now take for granted in our everyday lives, and it has grown since then, and it is free of charge. So it's a little bit unique in that sense. There are other STEM and science outreach programs. I think we're one of the only, if not the only, engineering outreach program, and we think that that's pretty important. So soldiering forward, here you go. You can see the pilot began in the school year, I believe, starting 1998, five schools. then 14. By the following year, it got bigger and bigger from there until 2014. We pick up the data. That's when we, as engineers of tomorrow, assumed responsibility for the program. We started running it. We were in 75 schools across Ontario, and we've since then experienced what I would call some geometric growth. As of this year, 2019, we're at 194 EIRs in over 200 schools across Ontario. Some EIRs are in more than one school, so that's why you see those numbers. So you are part of a growing movement, and we hope to grow it even further. So it's just a little bit of backstory on where this has come from. So lots of us like data. I'm sure everyone who's on this call is, you're either a STEM type teacher or you're an engineer or an EIT. We'd like to see the stats sometimes. So here you go. 51% PEngs, 49 EITs, which is great. EITs are either internationally trained engineers or they are young, recently graduated engineers in training. So it's excellent when we see that we have that burst of youthful energy, or those folks who can tell tales from engineering around the world. We think that really makes the program richer and more effective. So we like that stat, 50-50 as far as established PEngs and EITs, and 27% female, which we think is pretty great. These are actually stats from last year, and if I'm remembering correctly, it's up over 30%. I think it's 33 or 35% female this year. So why does this matter? I think because we know that half the classes, give or take, are little girls. If they can look up there and see someone who looks like them, reminds them of themselves, or they can see themselves in the future, that's only going to open doors to get the talent and ideas and possible innovation from those little girls who could grow up to be engineers of tomorrow, but without the correct role modeling and examples may not. Now, that's not to say that our male PEngs cannot inspire little girls just the same. We want to make sure then that they are mindful of that, and speaking to the whole class, not just to the boys. So ideally, gender doesn't matter. In practice, there's significant research that suggests that it does, and that an EIR of any gender can be a great role model if they're conscious of it. So then some calendar events for the year. We've already gone through being matched. Hopefully everybody is having luck in getting their vulnerable sector screenings, their police checks done. It does sometimes take up to a few months. We've had, in the worst case scenario, we've had some people need several months to get their police checks completed. We're very sorry about that. That's unfortunately just the way the system works. Ideally, the majority, though, are getting theirs back within a few weeks. 6 weeks, I think, is about a normal average time for a police check to come back. And that's why we started matching in May and June. So you have the summer basically to get that figured out. EIRs, you're invited to a summer webinar series, and that's happened already. Teachers, I believe you're invited as well. And those replays are available online if you're interested in watching them. If you were too busy vacationing and swimming and working over the summer, we can definitely get you caught up on that if you go check out our YouTube channel. So our orientation and first visits, those are all happening now. If you haven't done your first visit, don't worry about it. That's all in the direction we're going to be pointing you. And then to give you a heads up on where we're going from here, we're going to do what we call a mid-year check-in in January. So usually we just do that by email, and we ask you to complete a little form. It's like a little survey, and we give you some multiple choice, and then we give you an open spot. We are very mindful of your time. We know that all of you are very busy. That said, we want to do a good job of running the program effectively. So we do ask you for a check-in from time to time. If it's easier, we can jump on the phone or do a webinar where everybody can chat. Oh, April is hidden. Okay. So sorry, I'm just reading the chat here. The January check-in is usually held, like I said, online. It's just a passive thing that we ask you to fill in. So we are getting some data, but we can certainly oblige you and collect the data in a different way if that doesn't work for you. In April, I'm told that the slide is not showing up properly, so I will tell you what it says. This is when we do our call for renewals. we ask for any receipts, and we start recruiting for the next year. So April is when, winter's over. Finally, we can see the end of the school year from there, and we start thinking about the following year. So you've made a commitment. If you're in the EIR program for the first time, either as a teacher or as a volunteer engineer, you are committed. You are signed up for the duration of one school year. So as of April 2019, we're going to be reaching out to you and saying, hey, do you want to continue? Obviously, that's the ideal situation. If both you and your teacher want to continue, we will reach out to you separately and ask you each separately if you're good to continue. And if you are, then we email the two of you and say, okay, carry on. And if not, then we will go through a process of reshuffling and hopefully rematching you. And these things happen. We know that not everyone can carry on for various personal reasons or professional related reasons. So we just ask that you do let us know. If you need to drop out of the program before April, and we hope not, but if that ends up being something that you need to do, just let us know, because the toughest thing in the world is when someone just ghosts on their match. Either the teacher doesn't get back to the EIR, or the EIR doesn't get back to the teacher. That's very discouraging for the other person who does want to continue. So all we ask is that you let us know if your circumstances change and you're either no longer able to host an EIR or you're no longer able to volunteer as an EIR. We do have all other volunteers and other schools and other teachers that we can match with. So that is, let's see, here we go. So recruiting, that's obviously something that we do within the PEO chapter. You probably all received an e-blast reminding you that you can apply for recruiting. We do very well. We have a very good recruiting success within the EIR, within the PEO system. So just a little bit of information. This is mainly of interest for the engineers, I would imagine, is to know just how things break down by geography. So the PEO region, the PEO organization is broken down into 5 different chapters: East, Central, Eastern, Western, Western Central, and Northern. So here you can see, and if you know your chapter, and I hope you do, EIRs can see whether you have company or not, how many matched EIRs. These are people who are with a school and will be visiting schools this year. Unmatched means we unfortunately were not able to find a school that was geographically close enough to match. So we don't have too many of those, luckily. But then sometimes we do have unmatched schools. So you can see in the case of Scarborough, we have schools and no EIRs. So just take a look here and see if you can locate your chapter. If you see that there are unmatched schools, especially, we don't want that. We really want to engage every single school that we can. So if you're there, we would love it if you could maybe help us dust up some interest. Maybe you have some engineering colleagues or some engineering friends in your chapter that you could encourage. Just have them reach out to us and we'll see if we can get them incorporated. And again, another thing to know is matched EIRs. It's great if you can reach out to each other and find out what other EIRs are doing. It's always nice to enjoy a little bit of that community. So there's a little bit more information for you. And here we have the other 3 regions. So if you've been waiting, if you're from somewhere in Northern, Western, Central, or Western region, please have a look and see what you know. So again, this is matched EIRs. This is unmatched EIRs, this middle column, and this is unmatched schools over here. And holy cow, do we ever need some EIRs in Brantford. So if anyone out there is in Brantford or near Brantford, please let us know. So these are the types of gaps. If you're in a position to help us fix them, that is great. If not, we are going to be busy activating our own networks to see how we can close some of these gaps and continue to grow the program and bring its really positive impact to as many students and teachers and parents and EIRs as possible. Okay, so now I'm going to try to open up the floor here. Why did you want to be an EIR volunteer? And actually, I'll expand that question a little bit because I don't just want to hear from the EIRs. I'd also like to hear from the teachers. Why did you invite an EIR to be part of your classroom? Or why did you want to be an EIR if that's the hat that you're wearing today? So just please put your answers in the chat here. And we'll see what motivated you to sign up. I guess another way to ask this is, what impact do you hope to have? Or what's in it for you? What is it that you hope to gain out of it? There are all different ways to sort of unpack the why of why people get involved. So some of the things we've heard so far, as I mentioned, are all about why people want to pay it forward. They say, I've had such a great career. I really want to make sure that the next generation knows that they have the advantages that I've had. Opportunity to give back. That's a great one. Just came in now. Opportunity to fill in the gaps in the public perception of what engineers do. That's a great point, that we're not just influencing student perception of what engineering is and student understanding. They can also go home and educate the people around them, right? I don't know. I'm just old enough to remember when blue boxes were first getting implemented, and they tried to do a public education campaign, and it was less than ringingly successful initially when they tried to target the general public. People weren't interested. So what they did was they went into the schools and they taught the kids how to do the recycling, and then they went home. And, it sort of took off from there. The implementation rate really went up from there. So interesting, just to understand that, yes, we're not just talking to the kids. We are talking to the kids, and that's super important, but there is even a broader sort of ripple effect from educating our young people. So I'm seeing a few more answers coming in now. Giving back to the community I work in. I think it's important to introduce kids to engineering as soon as possible before stereotypes set in. Absolutely, Kayla, we totally agree. As a university professor, I'm interested in motivating underrepresented groups in STEM to join more engineering programs. That's fantastic, Mohammed. We're really glad to hear that. And when we talk about diversity and we talk about representation, obviously the women in engineering angle is the one that jumps out at us, but there are many other types of diversity. There's, ethnic origin, sexual orientation, there's a degree of ability, even to a certain extent, thinking style really plays a role. So having the more well-rounded sort of the representation within engineering, the stronger we're going to be. I wanted to learn more about STEM as it is a big push throughout the board. Okay, great. This is coming from an educator. I want to learn more myself, because as a teacher, we are constantly learning and changing with the times. That is great. I'll just expand on your comment a little bit. Thank you, Bonnie. Because we have spoken with teachers recently who are really intimidated by the prospect of having to educate their kids for such a highly technologically evolved, rapidly changing world. And they're saying, frankly, we don't even know what jobs are out there anymore. And to be honest, you can ask your EIR. They may or may not know, because things are evolving so quickly that unless your EIR happens to be very, sort of a futurist as a side hobby, they may not be able to tell you either, because the jobs that our kids are training for may not exist. They don't exist yet. As of today, the engineers of tomorrow do not have their jobs figured out yet. So that is definitely a challenge, and it can only they can only benefit from the type of foundational, here's what engineering is, here's how it works, here's what it can do, that we can do through the EIR program. Okay, great. A couple more responses here. Help youth make more informed decisions. For sure. We don't want them making decisions on the basis of, oh, well, this is what my friend said I should do, or this is what my teacher said I couldn't do, or what my teacher said I could do. Maybe that's not a great example. Teachers are good sources of data, but sometimes they take information from the outside world and they use it to make assumptions about themselves, and they could be really limiting themselves. I personally have a lot of friends, women about my age, sort of mid-career, who they have everything it takes to be a great engineer, but they didn't know about it and they didn't have the encouragement to pursue it. In one case, my friend was actually discouraged by her father, who was an engineer, and he told her, oh no, your physics mark isn't high enough. So that's a palm slap sort of moment for me, because her physics mark and my physics mark in high school, they were actually the same. And I've gone on to have a very rewarding career and a good experience in engineering, all things considered. So yes, absolutely agree with that. We want to give them good information. I want to be an EIR to give back to society, pay it forward, help the next generation understand what engineering is. Fantastic. I had a teacher friend who was involved in this program last year and loved it. Excited to have my students experience this program. want to bring fun into engineering and be inspired by the kids. I ran a STEAM conference for my intermediate students. Oh yes, Jan, I remember. I volunteered for that. I was at your first conference, I think, a few years ago. You had Chris Hadfield on the big screen. That was amazing. There was a lot of interest. Follow up with my staff. I love the fact there are more women volunteers modeling for our girls. Absolutely, and our male volunteers are committed to inspiring girls as well. I want my students to get excited about all things STEM. I want to expose them to new experiences. I'm pretty sure they don't know what an engineer is, so I'd like them to learn more about that profession. Okay, fantastic. Introduce newer fields of engineering to students, machine learning, computer vision. Great point, Homa. This is why, and we're going to talk about this a little later in the presentation. We are very encouraging, and we will go out of our way to support engineers and teachers who want to design new activities that reflect these emerging fields and these new things. So there are some things to consider when bringing more technologically advanced stuff forward to the kids, but we absolutely think that's really important, because we're giving them good information about what's actually happening out there. Show the human side of engineering, not only math and numbers. Totally agree. Want to show that engineering can be fun and rewarding. Oh my gosh, these are all fantastic answers. Thank you, everyone. That is everyone's answer. Feel free to chime in the comments as we go, but I'm going to move to the next slide for now. Some of our goals, and you've already covered a whole bunch of them, so it's great to see that alignment. We really think that changing the public perception of engineering is a really long, it's sort of a long term, slower acting, but very powerful way to change the course of society. Because when you think about it, if we have people, no matter what they decide to, pardon me, what they decide to grow up and do, whether they go and study engineering or they go into something else, if they are aware of engineering and they are technically literate, they're going to be making better decisions. They're going to be looking at the claims of politicians, for example, about the best way to proceed with certain policies, and they're going to be able to critically evaluate them. And they're going to weigh sort of evidence-based decision-making and thinking about, well, what did the experts who have been studying this for 20 years, what did they say? And how can we maybe all get on the same page and recognize that engineering, technology, scientists, they are there to guide humanity in the right direction. So this really has larger implications longer term for educating the public, whether they decide to choose engineering or not. We often say, maybe we're a little controversial in this sense, that our goal is not necessarily to recruit engineers. We're very happy if that happens. We're always looking to welcome more young people to the family. But an even bigger goal is that we make them aware of the option, and then they can choose for themselves whether it's the right thing. So connecting to that, breaking stereotypes, giving them good information, again with that catchphrase of raising awareness and enhancing the profile of engineering professions. So I don't know, and this is a topic you can maybe chat about with your match or offline at some point, about how engineering is viewed. Once people understand what engineering is it viewed as a desirable profession? Is it viewed as something that's a good idea? Is it something that parents are encouraging their kids to go into, or are they maybe steering them away to somewhere else? Engineering has transferable skills such as critical thinking as well. Absolutely. We completely agree with that. And we think, I would even go one step further than that. Kayla, yeah, it was Kayla that said that, to say that that engineers can give critical thinking skills to other professions. There is a little bit of the engineering skill set, some tools out of the engineering toolbox, if you will, that we can share with others and that they can benefit from integrating. Likewise, I will say we can learn from other professions, and the biggest example is EIRs learning from their teacher matches, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail later on, because we all have a different piece of the puzzle. Finally, getting rid of the mystery around engineering and technology and creating productive partnerships. So we do have a few open conversations with a couple of 3D printing companies. We're talking to Actua Canada, who runs a series of youth and STEM camps across the country. We're talking to them to figure out how we can sort of best join forces, how they can lend a little of what they're good at to us, and we can learn from them, and vice versa. And if any of you have if you're a board member for scientists in schools or that kind of thing, any membership or alliances within those other organizations, we'd really be happy to hear from you, because this is a great opportunity for us to continue to develop and grow the program. Okay. Now, about us. This is good context to understand who you're talking to and why I'm here. So as far as Engineers of Tomorrow, that is a two-person team that consists mostly of Rebecca, who I call Becky because I've known her since university. It's Becky and I, as well as usually we have a summer co-op student join us. This past summer, we had 2 summer co-op students join us. And the backstory on us is that we were incubated under Engineers Without Borders Canada since 2013. So I could tell you a little bit more about what that means if I had more time, but for now we'll say that they just helped us to grow. They gave us support and connections and sort of a head start on founding our own organization. And as of 2018, just last month, hooray, we became a nationally incorporated not-for-profit organization. So our goal is to shape the future of the engineering profession. Thank you for the congratulations. I'm seeing those come in. We partner with engineering companies, professionals, professional associations, and educators. So that's all of you who are on this call today. We want to transform the engineering profession. And we think that a really powerful way to do that is by changing the messages that are out there about engineering. So we say world-class engineering outreach. We mean that because we're not aware of anyone else who's doing exactly what we're doing. And, there are some people who will get up in front of a group of kids with a robot, or they'll do a popsicle stick bridge building event or something, and they'll say, look, we're spreading awareness of engineering. We think that's great, and we would take it even a couple steps further than that. And we're going to tell you a bit more about our approach later in this presentation. But that's the how. For now, the why is what we're doing. It's shaping the public's perception of engineering, and it really does change the future of engineering. And that in itself influences the future of society. So it's not a joke to say we're changing the world by being part of a program like this. You are the frontline folks that are helping us make this change happen. So I hope that you think that's as cool as we think it is. We're very grateful for the time that you donate and the way that you're giving of yourself to make this impact happen. We hope that it serves your needs as well, but it's very cool to see how you're part of a bigger change. So feel free to check us out at engineersoftomorrow.ca if you want to know more about us. So I believe I've got some photos of the team here. Here we are. So there's me on the left. Becky, unfortunately, could not make it today. She's driving her kids to about 17 different hockey tournaments and things. So she sends her best. And just a little FYI on Becky, she is a product of Science Quest. So some of you might know most universities have a science and engineering camp for kids. The one at Queen's University is called Science Quest. Becky grew up in Kingston, so as a kid, she had Science Quest come into her classroom, tell her about engineering. She didn't have any engineers in the family. Both her parents are teachers, as it happens. And she got involved as a high school student, volunteering with the Science Quest camp at Queen's as a junior counselor. And then when she went on to study engineering at Queen's, she became a counselor and then a director of the science and engineering camp at the university. So she's been through the whole life cycle of the whole system, which is pretty amazing. She then went on to work in pharmaceutical and food manufacturing. She did that for about a decade and a half. She reached out to me and said, hey, I'm looking for a change. I want to do something meaningful and creative and interesting and challenging because I'm not feeling that challenge anymore. And I can't explain to my kids why I need to go to work because I'm really not enjoying it that much. And basically, she came on board with Engineers of Tomorrow with me in 2016. So she's been working hard since then. And just telling her backstory and helping understand a little bit about her is an example of what we hope that you will do, EIRs, when you get into the classroom. So as for me, as I said, I met Becky in university, but when we were both engineering students. I hired her as an instructor for Science Quest. But even before that, I guess I would say I'm a country kid. I grew up, digging around in the mud and realizing that I really wanted to have a tangible impact on the world. It wasn't going to cut it for me to just write research papers or things. No shade to those who write research papers, but I really wanted to do something tangible. I have a lot of trades backgrounds in my lineage. My grandfather's a bricklayer, my father's a carpenter, and so I knew I wanted to do something really, really tangible. And for what it's worth, my parents always treated me with that real respect of you can do anything you want. I had Lego. I had My Little Ponies, but I also had a little mechanics kit. So I was playing with Lego ever since I was small. And fast forward to grade 12 when I heard the word engineer for the first time. And they said, you're good at math and science and it's hard, so maybe you should try it. And I have just that kind of personality that thought, hey, it's hard, so I'm going to do it. I took it on at that point. So from there, I went on to work in Magna, the automotive manufacturer. Didn't know what I didn't know at that point, but really ended up enjoying it. Got my Six Sigma black belt. And then from there, I ended up moving over to mining. I worked for the head office of a gold mining company. They sent me to South America for a little while, where I got to teach and coach others to do the operational problem solving I'd been doing. But I got to do it in Spanish, which was a really cool challenge. And when I came home, I decided to start my own business, and that led to a conversation with Engineers Without Borders that led to Engineers of Tomorrow way back in 2013. So there's just a little bit about us. You get a sense of where we're coming from and what we've been up to. Again, as I said, I encourage you, EIRs, tell your story. And this is one thing we're going to talk about a little later. When you're describing what it means to be an engineer, we really advise you to think about what it was as a kid that maybe it's something that your parents noticed or your siblings noticed or your friends noticed. Yeah, you're such an engineer. Like, look at how you do that. Like, that's an early warning sign. It's a really fun conversation. It's neat to think about those things. The dots only ever connect backwards, by the way. So don't worry if you don't know immediately what to say, if the examples aren't jumping to mind. Feel free to share some examples if anyone feels comfortable doing so on the chat box right now. But this is a process. We started in 2013, so I've been telling my engineering story for about 5 years now, and it's always evolving. So don't worry if you're not sure what to say, EIRs. Just know that this is something that we think, or we know by experience, is a very powerful way to introduce yourself. And it gives you that immediate human connection to the students and to your teacher. And then you build on that from there. Don't worry about impressing them. That's the opposite of what you need to do. I know when we go into a job interview or when we go into other types of new situations, sometimes we feel like we need to make ourselves important and lead with our credentials and show how complicated and cool and interesting and hard our job is. You actually want to do the opposite. You want to make it simple. You want to make it easy to explain. You want to make it fun and comfortable for the students to come along with you and to understand who you are. So there you go. I just gave you your first lesson. I modeled to you what it is to tell your engineering story, and I did Becky's a little bit too. That is the way that we would like you to, that's the foot we'd like you to get off on. Okay, so let me do a little time check here. Okay, I think we're doing really well for time. I have a few things I think you're going to ask me. I call them the big questions. These are the things that EIRs have been asking us for the last few years. So we thought, let's get out in front of them. Let's answer the questions. And we'll certainly, as I said, you're certainly welcome to drop additional ones into the chat if you have responses or additional questions. We're going to create time for that in our Q&A that is coming up after lunch. Okay. Question we always hear from EIRs. What do we do in the classroom? They're always, I won't say always, many EIRs, especially when they're new EIRs, are nervous about what to do. They need to understand just exactly what's expected of them. They really want to do a good job. Teachers, if you're getting that sense that your EIR is nervous, don't worry. That is part of, I believe it's part of what makes us a very diligent profession. We care about doing a good job, and we want to know the specifications. We want to know what the deal is. So basically, I'm going to do the most annoying thing in the world and say it's up to you. It's up to the EIR and the teacher to decide what you're going to cover. That said, the curriculum is often a really good place to start. And often teachers will say, look, I've got this item that I want to cover. It's gears and pulleys, or it's gravity, or it's whatever. How can we bring an engineering flavor into this? How can you help me cover this particular piece of curriculum? So teachers, please do understand that it may be very possible we have sort of an off-the-shelf activity that that your EIR can run in that case if you have a curriculum piece that you want to cover. However, it might be better to start in a more general place if you're just getting started. So your lessons may support the curriculum, or they may be related to the EIR. So if you get the sense your EIR is nervous, or EIRs if you are nervous, it's totally okay to start in a bit more neutral territory. Tell your engineering story, talk about some of your interests in the background. Maybe you volunteer on something. Maybe you've done, some of our members are involved with, say, IEEE, or they've done other things on the side like that are engineering related but not job related. That's great too. See our EIR lesson guide. I already see someone beat me to the punch here. Would you be able to provide samples or materials? Yes, absolutely. The lesson plan links on the EIR site are broken. Okay, we can look into that, Mohammed. I can show you where on the site you can download the lesson guide, and the individual activities are also posted there. So some EIRs also run after school competitions. They coordinate design competitions. They do all sorts of other things. They judge at science fairs. Sometimes they even organize field trips. And EIRs, if you have the type of workplace that would welcome a field trip, that would be interested, that would be a good thing that would be a rewarding experience for the students. And if your teacher is up for it, really, it's up to the two of you. Obviously, we need you to work within the regulations and permission structures set out by the school board and by the school. So you need to make sure that is all covered, permission slips, etc. We don't want you to go outside of that. That said, it's really up to you and the teacher to design what you're going to be doing. So, hope that gives you a good sense. We do have, as I said, lots of off-the-shelf lessons, and you can take those and make those your own. Plus your engineering story, plus the curriculum. Those are sort of where we like you to start, and then you can go from there to figure out what your plan is. And remember, this isn't all one shot. The nice thing about the EIR program that's a little different than other types of STEM engagement programs is that you don't have a lot of pressure on you to just get it right at the one shot deal. You're going to be going back. You're going to have the opportunity to update, to try other things, and to get to know your students, get their feedback, see what's working, and then maybe move in that direction. So the only thing I would add to this question is just to say, understand, teachers, that EIRs are not experienced in setting up lesson plans. Most of them have not set up a lesson plan before. We would just ask that you're not asking them to start everything from scratch right from the beginning. Sort of walk before you run, I would say, as far as co-creating that material. Next big question, how do I teach an engaging lesson? Okay, so this is what we call anatomy of a lesson plan. And there are many, many different models. Teachers, you might have a different way to explain this. This is just sort of our language to highlight the key points from an EIR perspective. You want to catch their attention at the beginning. Back in the day when I worked in Science Quest, we used to, light things on fire to catch the kids' attention. I don't think you can do that anymore. And again, I would stress that, safety is paramount, and you need to work within the guidelines and permission structures of the school and the school board. If the teacher wouldn't be allowed to do it, then you're not allowed to do it. That said, see if you can find something that's exciting at the beginning, or a question. I know that sometimes EIRs will bring in snippets of the newspaper, or they'll lead with sort of something that's happening in the news that people know about, and then use that as a jumping in point to talk about the lesson. So give them that information, make it interactive if you can, make it relevant to something they know. We do 100% recommend hands-on activities. When kids can get their hands involved, different parts of their brain light up and they're actually able to understand the material and engage with it and run with it even more. Finally, and I would say this is one of the most important things, I would say the activity is important, and then the link to engineering. How does this relate to the real world? I know me as a kid, I used to get in trouble for asking this. I'd say, so when are we going to use this? What does this mean? Why do we have to learn this? And I was the kid with the attitude, right? But in the end, I now know, looking backwards, that was just an early warning sign of me being an engineer. I wanted to see where this was relevant, where this was showing up, how this was going to have real world impact. So for the kids that are already hungry for those types of examples, they are going to love it. And for the kids that maybe never really thought about it, they're going to have their minds expand. So the link to engineering is super important. And we do have that in our sample lessons. We've done a few for you. And then as you get experienced, as you get comfortable, you're going to be able to do that yourself and say, maybe you want to design a brand new lesson plan where the link to engineering is your job, and you can bring something in, or you can tell about an example from a project you worked on. That's fantastic. If you can do that, do that. If you have the time to do it, because we understand that not everybody does, that's fine. But if you do, please let us know about it, because we'd love to have a copy of what you've done, and we'd love to share that with other EIRs for either inspiration or for direct sharing. Using other people's materials is totally acceptable, totally encouraged. And then there's the debrief, where you go over and sometimes you're doing, let's say you're getting the kids to build newspaper towers. You walk around to the different newspaper towers and you say, okay, well, look, this one's the tallest. That's great. So why is it good for a tower to be tall? Again, linked to engineering, right? What does that have to do with the real world? Why do we care about the tower being tall? All right, cell phone reception, prestige, tourist attraction, all that sort of thing. You brainstorm on those, and then maybe you go to another tower that isn't as tall, but it's really pretty to look at. Oh, okay, well, why is it good for this tower to be pretty? Maybe another tower, they built it really fast. Okay, well, why is that good? To be able to build things quickly. We can explain about cost pressures related to project management and engineering, or why is this one stable, all that sort of thing, especially if people are living in earthquake-bound areas. Maybe the tallest tower is not the best. Maybe we want to have something a little lower to the ground that's a bit more stable. So you see what I mean? You're giving feedback. You're constantly bringing in those real-world examples, and you're reinforcing the key lessons that are around what you're trying to do. So I'm having a question coming in here. What is the budget limit for hands-on EIR activities per EIR in school? We're going with $200 this year, Mohammed. So we do have that a little bit later in the presentation, but I won't keep you hanging. I'll let you know that that's what it is. Okay. So EIR.ca/resources is where you want to go. And then if you just go to this first thing, the program guide, here we go, over here on the right, download the PDF. That's where you'll find everything. If you go to EIR resources and then follow the drop down menu, you can go to activities, and it'll actually show up in a different form. I don't have the website open in this presentation, but you can do that. You're welcome to do that right now. You can have a look. So here's what they look like when they come up. You can filter using the tabs, the tags on the website. What level are we at? What are some of the themes, some of the activities, some of the elements. And if you keep following this structure, it gives you a sense of how much prep time you need to allocate, how long the activity lasts, what are the materials you need, what are some of the key things. And this is maybe good for teachers to have a look at, to say, okay, well, which elements are these linked to the curriculum that I'm trying to cover? That can be really handy. And then if you look down a little bit further, we've provided for the lesson plans that we have a link to engineering and some key examples. So there you go. This is us giving you a head start on creating the lesson plans. That said, we really don't want you to limit yourself just to what we've given you. Don't think of it as a prescription. We're not telling you what to do. That is part of the value that you bring to the table as an EIR, as a teacher, is to figure out and design what you're doing. So there is a little bit of extra time involved in that, and we hope that you'll take the time. I know that teachers spend a lot of their free time doing that type of prep anyway, so we hope that you'll be able to meet with your EIR, chat about what works, and come to some decisions, try some things out, sort of iterating and learn together. And then, and yeah, it'll just get easier over time if it's in terms of the amount of time you need to spend. Okay, here we go. Tips to run a good lesson. Asking questions is a great idea. Again, teachers, you'll know this. EIRs, maybe this is also old hat to you, but it's good to have a refresher. Incorporate some learnings that engage the senses, so different types of intelligences. So it's really great to point that out to kids. It's not just one way of being smart. It's not just about getting high math marks or high science marks. You know, someone who can communicate really well, someone who can lead a team, someone who can come up with new ideas that people haven't thought about before. You can talk about design thinking and listening to your customers and how that's really important in engineering situations as well. I have a funny story about the engaging the senses. I was volunteering for my PEO chapter. I'm chair of the Grand River chapter of PEO right now. And a few years ago, I was volunteering at a fair for kids. They were grade 7 and 8s, and it was trying to recruit them to think about engineering. And they had a whole bunch of different firms there. So they had, Christie Digital, and they had BlackBerry, and they I think ClearPath Technologies was there. All these different startups with these really impressive, robot-looking things, very fancy. I was there with the PEO banner behind me, and we had these beautiful little stickers, and everything was very well curated and looked really nice, like really professional. It was very expensive. And we thought, okay, great, like bring on the kids. And so they released the kids into this hotel ballroom, and they're running around, and they're very, very excited. And they would approach our table, and they would basically talk to us for maybe 10 or 20 seconds before they would run off in another direction. It was really hard to hold their attention. And they were sort of in this free range environment. And it was, like I said, 10 to 20 seconds was sort of the max we could engage them. And they'd grab these cool little engineering rocks tattoos that we'd had. So like grabbed our tattoos, grabbed the pencils, and ran away. And I looked across the aisle, across this hotel ballroom, at this booth that had 5, 10 kids deep, sort of crowded around it. They were staying there forever, and they were looking, and they were engaged. And I was like, what are they doing over there? And it was the Engineers Without Borders booth. The chapter from the University of Waterloo had come, and they had a little felt backdrop with some photos of some people doing some agricultural projects in Africa. And they had a bucket full of rice with some wooden blocks in it. And that's what the kids were looking at. They were telling stories. They were, letting the kids put their hands in things. And I think what they were doing was explaining how this was a very simple way to get the husk off of the rice. It was like a really basic tool. And I thought, wow, we just got our butts kicked. Our beautifully, designed, professionally printed materials, expensive little giveaways. We just got our butts kicked by this bucket of rice with wooden blocks in it. And it really stuck with me that it's about the story. It's about the experience. And when you get their hands on it, we had nothing the kids could play with. That was the mistake we made. We had nothing the kids could play with. So we've changed that. But anyway, that is my story about engaging the senses and really making something engaging and relatable. Okay, so try to relate a new idea, to something that students can relate to. Again, this is really good for teachers. They know their kids. They know what they're into, what types of examples they're going to respond to. And again, picking examples that are going to relate to both the boys and the girls is something to think about as well. Give recognition and encouragement. Again, remember what I said about you are a symbol of what's possible for them. You are opening up their worldview. So you don't want to open it up to say, hey, look, here's engineering, here's this new thing that exists, only to shut them down by saying, oh, well, you didn't perform very well on my little test here, so now this is off the table to you. I don't think anyone does that on purpose. I think that would be pretty mean and unnecessary, but it can happen accidentally. If we set activities up in a certain way where we're pitting kids against each other, or where we're kind of encouraging an environment that has a lot of kind of criticism and so high impact information, real like win-lose sort of mentality, that can be inadvertently what we do. So on that note, encourage the self-reflection in the students. Let's go back to that example where their newspaper tower falls down. You know, you can do an amazing job as a facilitator, and the teacher can help you with this, of reframing a failure as a learning opportunity and say, you know what? This stuff happens in the real world too. You know, disasters happen, explosions happen, projects get way behind and way over budget. This happens in the real world all the time. I'm in Waterloo, and we have our ION light rail transit trains that are, I think, 2 years late at this point. They're over budget, but not by that much. I think they're only over budget by a couple million, but 10 million or so on an $800 million budget. But anyway, my point is, you can really normalize failing or having difficulty by giving them the opportunity to self-reflect and say, great, you failed. Great, you figured something out. That means you learned. What did you learn? Rather than having them walk away with, oh, I learned about this new thing called engineering today, and it turns out I'm terrible at it. And now I feel bad about myself. That is the opposite of what we're trying to do, right? Even if the activity itself doesn't go exactly as they planned, we want to make them resilient to that, make them see the bigger picture. And I have a young daughter myself, and one of her favorite books that is one that we have called Rosie Revere Engineer. Not sure if anyone's familiar with this book, but it goes out of its way to really paint the picture of how failing is just the beginning. Because when you try something and it doesn't work, that means that you've got that first bad prototype out of your system. The perfect first try, it's called, when you fail. It's the perfect first try. And now you know how to keep going. So again, teachers, they're going to know, teachers, you are going to be able to teach your EIR a lot about this, and some of the psychology around helping kids try something out that they're not good at or that they haven't done before, and giving them a chance to bounce back from that and to keep liking it. Okay, so this is a really big topic, but we wanted to talk about stereotypes in engineering. We really feel there's a lack of understanding, as we've spoken previously, and that contributes to this disconnect. So we have, people who, a society who's being served by an engineering population who doesn't really understand that they're there, or doesn't understand that they are themselves customers of engineering solutions. And so they don't always take the time to articulate what they need. Engineers, smart as we are, do not always take the time to close those gaps, so they don't always have the opportunity in their jobs to do that. So that is sort of a large-scale systemic disconnect. And when we define what it means to work in engineering, it really does help us reflect on our own purpose and importance and diversity. And I'll say this, we worked on National Engineering Month. Some of you might know us from that capacity. We started National Engineering Month in 2013 in Ontario. And by the time it really got rolling, we grew the size of the campaign a lot by bringing on more volunteers and empowering volunteers to do their own types of events. We were working with upwards of 1,500 volunteers across Ontario per year. And we heard and saw this effect happen over and over again. They said, I went to change the students and I ended up changing myself. I got so much out of this. I didn't even see that coming. Because when you think about, hey, why did I become an engineer? And we were working with not just engineers, but also technologists from OSET, also engineering students. So it was all, this sort of bigger engineering and technology community. It's really, really valuable. And again, I don't want to tell you EIRs what your experience is too much. Maybe you're already starting to sense it, that in order to get your story straight, to tell it in front of a group of kids, you're going to need to think about it yourself. And in thinking about it, that is going to give you some new insights and some new reflections. So that's a really powerful thing, especially when you consider that we're you're doing this yourself in your own office or in your own free time at home. But then that also is being done by 200 other EIRs. And then that we hope to grow even further beyond just the borders. And that, over time, everyone waking up to what the purpose is and how this all fits together, that is huge. So emphasis on the why of engineering, not just talking about the how, which a lot of us, and I see this as an engineer myself, we can really nerd out on the how. What does the spreadsheet say? What's the model? What's the analysis? What's the, what is the software doing? What kind of tools are we using to get the result that we want? What does it mean? Why does it matter that we get it right? Who are we serving? How do people feel about it? How do we feel about it? And what is the impact in human terms? So just to use an example, Becky has told me that when she worked in pharmaceuticals, she learned an awful lot. They were manufacturing medicines, and they had to go through FDA approval, and there were tons and tons of audit requirements and things they needed to do in order to have the ability to continue to manufacture and sell these medicines. And so she learned a ton about the how. She had, tools stacked up, stacked up to the ceiling on what she learned about the how. But not once in the, I think, 12 years that she worked in pharma did anyone ever talk about the fact that they were making medicines that were helping people feel better, that they were curing sickness. That was never, the impact of what they were doing was never on the table. So I would challenge each of you, and again, feel free to jump into the chat box and share if you feel comfortable doing so. I would challenge each of you engineers, think about what it is that your work contributes to. Some companies are really good at figuring this out. Stantec, for example, they talk about design with community in mind. So they're very mindful of the impact that their work has on communities because their business model requires them to be. Other types, like pharmaceutical manufacturers, maybe don't have as great a connection, or at least within their employees, that connection isn't as well understood. But we think it's really worthwhile to explore those connections and get inside the why. It's going to provide you with a brand new experience of your job, and it's going to really refresh you, not to mention prepare you to tell the story to your EIR classroom in a really effective and accessible way. So the message is important there. Again, this is the one I heard in high school. The question here is, what do young people hear? This is what I heard in high school. You're good at math and science. Maybe you want to try engineering. And again, this is just, we have to be super careful here because it's true that you do need math and science to succeed in engineering, but that's not all engineering is. I don't think I'd be a very good scientist, to be honest. I don't think I'd be a very good mathematician, right? It's the application of those tools to problems that matter to people. That's where I get excited. When I know I can make a problem, I can make a process run better, or I can reduce the environmental impact, or I can eliminate the injuries by changing the ergonomic layout of a cell in a factory. Those are the types of things I used to do as a manufacturing engineer. That was what would really make me excited about my job. So it's not just about scientific aptitude. It's about taking science and math. Those are the building blocks. Those are the starting points. You take those and you do stuff with it that matters to people. I think that's maybe the best way I can explain engineering is you pick up your math and science tools and you do stuff with them to create outcomes that matter to people. Again, here are some examples of some things we hear. Engineering is about building stuff. Again, it is about building stuff. Some engineers are very hands-on, and that's fantastic. Others not so much, and it may be because they haven't had a chance, or it may be because it wasn't expected of them growing up. Maybe they grew up in a culture where that sort of behavior was very discouraged. Or certainly in the case of some young girls, they are told, don't break stuff, whereas little boys are expected to get up to that sort of thing. No, you're not supposed to do that. So again, just because someone doesn't have hands-on experience building something doesn't mean they can't be a great engineer or that they can't grow into comfort on building things later in life. Engineering is the process of innovation. Yes, absolutely. And what bigger topic could there be than innovation, right? I mean, that's so broad. It encapsulates so much, and it's so important. You hear our governments talking about it as fuel for new jobs and maintaining our economic health as a country. Innovation is a huge thing, and I think we can totally It's not that engineers aren't being innovative. I believe that we are. I think we're not very good at telling the stories about the ways that we're innovative. And so being an EIR is one way that you can contribute to that lack of storytelling, I believe. So, just back up here. Thank you, Ian. He provided a quote here for us. He says, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." And that's a Thomas Edison quote. Great example. And that's perfect. And that's the type of perspective we want to provide for young people who are getting their hands on something they're trying on being an engineer maybe for the first time. They need to know that it's okay if it doesn't work the first time. In fact, maybe that's even better. They need to maintain that confidence and that curiosity to soldier through maybe failing or feeling a little bit bad about it not working at the first time. Cool. That's really important. This is actually a little bit of a joke on my part here. Engineering driving trains. I don't hear that as much anymore. I used to a lot more hear, oh, engineers drive trains when I ask, what does an engineer do? Other default messages about engineers. Anyone's welcome to write into the chat box sort of either what you heard maybe when you were a younger person or some of the stories that are coming through for young people. Teachers, you're welcome to give me some examples as well. If anyone is talking about engineering at all, which as previously discussed, we know they might not be, what are some of those messages? Where do they get them? And how can we maybe make them more complete? So Michael already gave us a great example of engineering is about innovation. It's a process of innovation. That is a much more complete, I would say, accurate description of what engineering is and what it could be. So while you're thinking on that, I will give you some other examples. Discovery process, dealing with constraints and making things work in the real world. Design, it's all around you. Solving problems today and identifying opportunities for the future. So there's maybe where that innovation part comes in. We want to challenge misconceptions and stereotypes. Instead of saying engineering is hard, and we hear that a lot, we get students to fill out surveys ahead of time often, and they'll write things like building or difficult or important, or they have a sense that engineering is something it's something big, it's something significant, but they don't think it's fun until after. That's the number one word we get on our outtake surveys, is that engineering is fun. We think that's great. Going from it's only for certain people, or it's obscure, and or it's an elite club. And again, that's tough because some of, getting into some of the top universities requires you to have 95% averages. And that's really unfortunate because that sends a message that not everyone can belong in engineering, at least in terms of that school. So I would encourage you, if you get that feedback, especially if you're working with slightly older kids with high schools or upper year elementary schools, really try and balance that out by saying, maybe that's not the right school. Maybe you have another school you can go to and you can still go on out into the real world and solve problems and be very successful. We really do think it's worth giving up a bit of our own prestige to say it's not elite. There is a place for you. You don't have to be a genius. You can get involved and you can be part of this. So focusing on understanding the world, there's a place for you, broad applications and impact, lots and lots of different ways to explain engineers. Great. Okay, got some things coming in on the chat. Let me just read them back. Thank you very much for your comments. Something I saw when I was young was a limited range of engineering disciplines, mainly civil and software. Yeah, fair enough. I think my personal opinion, I don't have research to back this up, mind you, but I do feel that leading with the names of the disciplines is another way to intimidate kids and turn them off from being interested. I would lead with, here's the big picture of what you can be part of. Give them examples. Don't tell them what the label is for the type of engineer. If they ask you, it's fine to get into it, but I wouldn't lead with it. I wouldn't bring it up because I think that's something we're interested in as engineers. What discipline, which degree, that's fine. It's what we care about. But I would first lead with the bigger picture and more examples and getting them excited and making it seem more accessible. Veronica says, my understanding was just like you. If you have an aptitude for math and science, you can be an engineer. We had guidance counselors coming into my classroom telling all the girls to stay in math and science. So I think it's true, Veronica, that it's such a nuanced message, I think, because the guidance counselors, they're doing the best they have with the information that they're getting, right? They know the prerequisites. They want to counsel people to stay in math and science, to keep the engineering open. I think really what it boils down to is that the system of engineering education is kind of disconnected from the practice. And I'll just tell a quick anecdote. I wasn't the strongest student academically in university. I was very smart in high school, but then all of a sudden something happened in university. I sort of hit a wall, and I passed and everything. I was fine, but I wasn't sure, and it really shook my confidence. And I thought, well, I'm not a very good engineering student. I'm not going to be a very good engineer. And then when I graduated and decided to try out a job anyway, I actually did really well. And I thought, it's because maybe I have more of that real world strength that I wasn't so good at the academic side. Being good at the academics does not necessarily mean you're going to be a good engineer. And more importantly, being bad at the academics does not mean you'll be a bad engineer or that you can't do this. So it's a tricky thing. And I completely understand why guidance counselors, I don't know, they're really, they're in a tough spot because they're describing something that they don't know enough about to describe accurately, but they try, right? So I think talking about math and science is a good first step, and maybe what we can say is over time we can inject more engineering content, because there isn't an engineering class, right? There's no engineering class. There's math class and science class. So if we inject engineering content into those, then over time that's going to become more clear. Kayla says, my guidance counselor told me I couldn't handle university and I'm doing a PhD. Good for you. See, guidance counselors don't know everything, and often they read something, they make assumptions about a student, about their potential, and they're not always right. So good for you for not accepting that as a limitation. So here's our little very engineering-y diagram about why engineering messaging matters. Here we are over here in the engineering profession, talking to students over here, and let's say we have a certain group of kids who are going to choose engineering no matter what. These are all the students out here who could choose engineering, but they might go somewhere else just because they don't really feel like the popsicle stick bridge building and the robots are really speaking to them. So let's say we try to change the way that we represent engineering in the classroom, and we get a few more kids interested. That is going to represent more diverse entries coming into the engineering profession, because we have kids who weren't just sort of sold from day one about engineering, but they now are bringing different perspectives. So let's expand that even further and say maybe there are other kids, and these, again, this is the student population here. These are kids who are into the robots and they're signing up no matter what, but there are other kids that would never have chosen or maybe even considered engineering. What about them? What about these kids here who are super creative and want to change the world? These are kids that are getting involved in Habitat for Humanity, or maybe Meet a Wee Day, or they're doing things that are very idealistic in nature. What if we told them that you can save lives by being an engineer? You can, maybe engineers save more lives than doctors, drop that one on them. Talk about the different ways that engineers have broad systemic impact through the design and the systems that they maintain and design, and how important that is. What about these kids over here? Let's say this other group of students, this is the creatives. Maybe they're in band and they're writing poetry and they're doing other things. Maybe we look at them and we think, oh, those kids could never do it. Yes, they can. They absolutely can. It's really a misconception that you can only be one kind of smart at the same time. And I would say this myself, again, as someone who was in band and in cross country and played sports in high school, and I was good at math and science. So it's really important to help them see, you know what, being a creative person, going into math and science, or sticking out with your math and science because you could go into engineering, that's a really good fit for you too, because you can get into design, you can get into all kinds of things I can't even think of right now. There's lots of times when creativity and artistry and engineering need to come together and do come together. So let's say this third group, Let's see, we got change the world, being creative, maybe leaders or team players. Maybe these are captains of teams, or these are maybe the loudmouths, the rebellious ones, the ones that seem to be able to get kids to follow along with them, and saying, you know what, you've got the math and science skills. You could consider, being an engineering manager, being a leader, having your technical skills and using that in concert with your leadership skills. You could accomplish a whole lot. So over time, we get more of those types of people coming into engineering. That spells a great future for our engineering profession. So this is sort of reinforcing what we've talked about already. You have your activity, you add your message, and that is going to create the most impact. And here are just some additional, this is from one specific research study. We like to refer to research studies whenever we can, using the data and all that. This is the Changing the Conversations campaign. And they surveyed 10,000 young people, and they tested hundreds of messages on them about engineering. And it turns out these are the top 4 that were the most appealing to them, to young people. So needing diversity and saying there is a place for you. If you've worked with National Engineering Month, you might recognize that there is a place for you has been the motto of the National Engineering Month campaign nationally for the last few years, anyway, the last 2 or 3 campaigns, I believe. That is derived from this research study. And that was us that brought it to Engineers Canada and thought, hey, this is a good idea. Let's go with this. So anyway, there's just a little history trivia for you. Shaping the world around us. This is a fascinating conversation to have with young people. Ask them to picture the world 50 years ago. What were people thinking about? What were they doing? How did they get to work? What did they do for fun? How has that changed today? Okay, ask them the same questions. What about 50 years from now? So fun to ask kids what the next thing is going to be. I've had all kinds of fantastic answers come out of them. And some of them are quite feasible, like very almost definitely going to happen. And some of them are more fanciful, like they got it out of Harry Potter or something. But still, you're testing the bounds of their imagination, helping them see how, yeah, you know what? Like all of those things were just ideas once. Somebody had to think about it. Somebody had to write it down, design it, get some money, build a prototype, test it out. Yeah, okay, it works. Let's sell it. Like that is how things happen. That is how change happens. And that's how the world gets shaped. It's one idea at a time. And you can be part of that. Like, I think that's really exciting and empowering for young people to understand. You are not just here to be in the grown-ups world to consume the things that are put in front of you. You can be part of it. You can really make a change. You can shape the world. Here we go back to the creativity and imagination. That's the idea part of the equation that I just mentioned, and knowing that converting ideas into reality, that is part of what we do. And it's a pretty good way to describe engineering, even though we all work in very diverse industries. We have diverse disciplines. We have different job functions. The big picture of what we're doing, broadly speaking, is to take an idea and make it happen. And again, that's pretty exciting and comforting. So engineering and technology, essential to safety, health, and happiness. Again, this is going back to that point I gave you earlier about pointing to the impact. What are the outcomes? Why does this matter to people? And knowing that this is people working for people, really trying to combat that message that engineering is very disconnected from society, or that it's something that's sort of abstract. No, they are actually flesh and blood human beings doing this work to make sure that you have the stuff around you. And we make a world of difference. Again, if you've been with the National Engineering Month campaign, you know that make a world of difference was one of the slogans that they used. So I hope as I'm giving you these messages, you're thinking about ways that you can integrate them into the stories you tell, that you can take them, you could build a lesson plan around them, or you could just weave them into something you're planning to do already. You could find an anecdote from your work, something that happened to you in university, or a project that you worked on, or something you're doing right now in your job, and think about ways to sort of bring this point home to help them understand what you actually mean when you say something like shape the world or ideas into reality. What are you talking about there? What does this mean? You're really, like I said, expanding their worldview by giving them that information. It's super, super powerful. So I mentioned bridge building earlier, and I don't want anyone to think that we don't like bridge building. You can see these kids are absolutely thrilled. They've got their medals around their necks for their award-winning bridge here. One thing that we do feel about bridge building is that it only represents one branch of one type of engineering, of civil engineering, structural engineering. So we are running the risk that we're giving kids an incomplete narrative about what engineering is and what it's about. And I know I, as a kid, probably wouldn't have been interested in building a bridge. That wouldn't have been enough to make me say engineering. And if I thought that that's all engineering was, if that's the picture that was presented to me, I would have had a negative experience and I probably wouldn't have chosen it. So that's not to say that bridge building is not good. It is to say that I think there's more we can do. So if you're doing bridge building, here is a way that you can make it more relevant. You can make it come alive for the types of kids who aren't just about building for the sake of building it. So you do have kids who want to build a strong bridge. They'll be into the geometry and they'll like the challenge competition aspect of it. You can see here's an example from a bridge building competition. I think this is before they had the big bridge breaker, the fancy machine. They were doing it the old-fashioned way here with weighing down a bucket and propping up the bridge between two sort of arbitrary tables. Like this could be anywhere. They didn't sort of give any context for why this was important or what it meant to bridge this table to that table. Like what was the impact? Who cares about bridging this table to that table? They were very involved in the how and not really giving the why. So this was an example that was developed by the Engineers Without Borders professional chapter in BC. You can see they've got here a little dummy map of the city of Trail, where they have they've drawn, okay, that's great. You've got a bridge that works. Now you're going to take that, your bridge is broken now, but let's say you build another one that's the same. You got a nice strong bridge, which is awesome. Now, where are you going to put it to make the best impact for people? And they had a few different examples of, here's where you could put it here. You could put it here. What would that do? What would that mean? And just brainstorming a little bit for what that's going to mean for the folks who live in this neighborhood. Now, all of a sudden, you've opened up the lesson to other kids who are thinking a little differently. The ones who need to know why this matters before they will tune into the how, they're now thinking about, oh, well, what would it mean if I lived there? I mean, oh, that could mean that, in an emergency, we could get to the hospital faster. Oh, okay, yeah, let's put that bridge here. Just getting them thinking about that and really connecting this abstract thing to this real world example. And again, teachers, you might have ideas on how to even fine tune and improve this even more, but this is the type of thing we'd like to see you do. So if you want to do a conventional engineering outreach activity like bridge building, we're not going to tell you not to do it. What we would ask you is to just really remember this message. Don't just deliver the activity, because that might not appeal as much and to as broad a group of kids as you would hope it would. Add the message. Add an example like this that broadens its appeal, you're going to have more impact. So I hope that makes sense. Here's an EIR success story. This is by no means something that you are obligated to do or that we would require of you, but there was an engineer who was interested in assisting their school with creating a universally accessible schoolyard. That was something that he wanted to do. He felt comfortable doing it, and they felt that it was just such a fantastic success story. They were really happy with it. So this was an engineer, his name was Billy. He was with us a few years ago. And this is just an example of ways where you bring that creativity and that sort of baseline of, we're trying to help people, we're trying to solve interesting problems, we're trying to change ideas into reality. Maybe you can model that in ways that go beyond just creating these activity experiences in the classroom. So again, this isn't to say, EIRs, please don't look at this and feel like, oh my goodness, I have to do that and I don't know how to do that, or I don't have time to do that. Don't take it that way. Just see this as an example. It's an invitation for you and your teacher to think a little more broadly. If you have the time and inclination, there are some really cool things that can come out of it. Okay, I think we're getting toward the end. I'm going to go out of big picture thinking mode and into a little bit more tactical mode. I'm maybe just going to pause for any questions, and let me experiment with taking you off mute and see what that does. Does anyone have any questions or comments that they'd like to give? I've got the line open, so please go ahead and speak up if you'd like to share something, if you have a question.
I got $4 on Google.
Okay, it doesn't seem like there are any questions at this point. I guess I must be doing a great job at filling in all the details. We wanted to make the connection between good messaging activities and National Engineering Month. So maybe just like a little show of hands, or if someone can just pop a question or a response into the chat box. How many of you have gotten involved with National Engineering Month before? Just a little yes, or I have, or something like that. That would be great just for me to understand. You have? Okay, fantastic. I don't need to re-explain everything then about National Engineering Month, except to say it happens in March, and it is a province-wide campaign to basically do what we do all year around in the EIR community. But this is just in March, and it actually goes beyond just engineering. That also includes technicians and technologists, because it's a partnership between PEO, OSPE, and OACET, which is the Ontario Association of Certified Engineering Technicians and Technologists. And Becky and I know quite a lot about the campaign because we used to run it. As of this year, we don't run it anymore. We were very pleased to hand it off to another service provider, Groundswell, who are really cool design thinkers. They've done lots of cool work in the STEM engineering outreach space, and they're going to take it in a really new and exciting direction. We still encourage you to get involved. If you check out nemontario.ca, as of today, October 20th, their forms are live for applying for funding. You can get up to $700 toward your event expenses in March. You do have to apply by November 16th. So there's lots more information online if you jump in there. A little example here. My students made an iMovie to showcase all the careers that involve engineering. I think Becky showed you a couple of examples. Oh, cool, Veronica. I don't think I saw that. Can you, maybe follow up with us if we haven't seen that yet? I'd love to see that. Okay, so that's National Engineering Month. And they take this messaging strategy as well. So if you get comfortable with this, idea of telling stories through your activities, don't just use it to cover curriculum, to check off a box to say, okay, we talked about this and that's it. Really think about sending a good message, creating a positive experience for the students. That activity plus the message, the stories that you tell, that is going to have a fantastic impact. Okay, so I'm going to do just a little bit of a taste of some basic educational psychology, I guess. Teachers, you will have learned this years ago, so apologies for the repetition. EIRs, you might not have seen this before, so we wanted to give you a sense that when people hear things, they say in general, they get about half. Sight, they get about half. People do vary individually. If you make them read it, they only get 10%. Whereas if you add in more, that is add in other ways to engage all of their senses, as I said, get them hands-on, that is going to make their absorption rate go way, way up. So there's also a Harvard-educated psychologist called Howard Gardner. I Googled him. He's still alive. He's written lots of books and very well respected in the field, and talked about the theory of multiple intelligences. So you can see here all the different ways that people are intelligent. So engineering, traditionally or stereotypically covers off probably visual, spatial, and logical mathematical. That is to say, there are all these other ways that people can be smart, and these ways are important too. And the reason that we mention this is because you're going to be going into a classroom and you're going to be referring to, what people are good at, or you're good at this and I'm good at that, or, they're going to really listen to you. And if you send a signal to the students that says that math or science smarts are the only ones that matter, you're going to risk creating a negative experience for them. So to say, there are all different ways that people can be smart. Certainly when I start to think of people that I worked with when I was a manufacturing engineer, some of the smartest people I've worked with are electricians and millwrights. They don't have the same level of higher education that I had, but they certainly had the visual spatial smarts, and they were logical, mathematical. They could take things apart, more of that kinesthetic, I guess that would be. And if you've met people, who really know themselves, they're very smart and strong in themselves intrapersonally. they get along with people, they're really good at describing things, they're great communicators. These are all, I think, as engineers, we often would call these soft skills, and I actually really disagree with that as a descriptor. I think they're not soft skills, they're just different things. And if an individual engineer is not good at those other things, they might minimize them and say, oh, those are not important, they're fluffy, I'm the one who's got the type of smarts that really matter. But actually, there's this very well respected psychologist and this very well respected theory that talks about all these theories of multiple intelligences. So I would encourage you to move away from thinking about a hierarchy or sort of a chain where like math and science are at the top and arts are at the bottom. Put that sideways. Say this is a spectrum where people who are good with people and people who are good at communicating and expressing themselves, they are just as important. Those skills are just as important, but different from the visual, spatial, and the logical, mathematical. So there's lots more to say there, but I guess what I'm getting at is that we want to go out of our way to be very inclusive and democratic about the way that we talk about intelligence. It's not just about marks, and it's not just about math and science. Questions or ideas for facilitating a lesson? Please go ahead and drop them in the chat box anytime. So here's a little bit more about the ways of teaching. We love to see, again, we talked about activities that are engaging. If you can have that back and forth between, in this case it says the teacher, but what we actually mean is the EIR and the teacher, everybody sort of works together. Rather than giving them a solution, let them find it. Rather than telling them, answering their questions, ask them questions, see what they think, sort of push them a little bit, not to be just focused on the outcome, but what did you learn from it? So back to my example of the towers. Okay, so someone's tower fell down and someone else's didn't. That actually doesn't matter. It's about the process. It's about what you learned along the way. Instead of focusing on subjects, sort of in a silo individually, how can we draw connections between subjects? And this is, I think, really cool. Reminds me of my elementary school background where, we used to think like, oh, geography's over here and math is way over here. It's way different, or social studies is over here and science class is over here. Like they're completely different things. I was actually fortunate enough to have an elementary school teacher who did something called a simulated society. He called it SimSoc, and he had us all adopt jobs and we started companies and we did all kinds of things. He was teaching us like this is how the world works, and he integrated different elements of the curriculum from all different types of subjects. So it was really neat to see how he was able to pull everything together. This is the point where in the program where if we had all day, I would invite an experienced EIR to jump up and give us a presentation. We did survey some experienced EIRs, and you will get this survey at some point once you become experienced, about what it means to be an EIR and what you learned along the way. I mean, again, I think we're sort of practicing what we preach as far as emphasizing the process. If things don't go as planned with your EIR or with your teacher, it's good not to get discouraged, not to get caught up there. Keep moving ahead. So be realistic in what you can handle, and this has a lot of different levels to it. I guess mostly we're talking about time management here, and make sure that you have the time to do what you commit to doing. Don't overcommit because you get excited and then end up sort of backing out later, because that's going to be really disappointing to your match. Slow and steady is what we recommend, and plan things that you actually are going to be able to follow through on. Which leads nicely into my next point about planning ahead. That's a pretty obvious one, I think. Teachers are generally very well planned and well organized. Same thing with engineers. We tend to be pretty good at planning. We do want you to have fun. Look for ways, if you can, to make this interesting for yourself. If there's something that you feel like teaching teachers, or some thing you've always wanted to try, like, hey, why not bring it up and see if you can make it happen with your EIR? There's got to be something in it for you as well. We know that as engineering professionals and as teachers, our plates are already full. A lot of us really sometimes struggling to keep up with what's expected of us. So make sure that you create some time for fun, for this to be interesting for you and not just one more thing you need to check off your list. Being creative, again, that's what I said about thinking outside the box. Don't just think that you have to show up and do the same things that everybody else does, although you can certainly leverage other people's experience if you want to. You can copy their lesson plans and use them, that kind of thing, and working as a team together. That's definitely important. So now I'm getting into some of the nuts and bolts here. You can access this financial support through us. We will cover the cost of your vulnerable sector screening. It's usually $25 to $30, maybe a little bit less depending on where you live. And we will reimburse you for that. For this year, we are asking you to submit by June 2019 and just reimburse the first time after that. It should be good for a year or two. So project materials, we're going to be updating the process. We're targeting to keep our $300 classroom budget the same, but please stay tuned for further communication on that. So some of you who may know already, we have been providing $300 per EIR per classroom that they attend. But we don't have our budget finalized for 2019. I'll explain a little more about that. That said, you can totally tap into National Engineering Month funding for anything you want to do with your classroom in March. It's going to fall. If it falls under under the category of the EIR program, it falls under NEM. The mandates, as I said, are almost identical, so you don't need to worry about whether it's relevant or not. More just think about whether you can deliver it in March, because it does have to be in March. And there's funding available, and you can go ahead and sign up. The deadline there is mid-November, so that's good to know as well. Here's some other support that we offer. So in the category of non-financial, there's matching to schools and teachers. If you're here, you've already been through that. There's the orientation session, which we're doing right now. There are EIR newsletters, which we send out. Now, because of privacy laws, we do have to have you opt into that. So please do opt into the EIR newsletter if you haven't already. There's messaging guidelines, outreach resources, and projects. We've already sort of spoken about some of those resources. And as I mentioned, if you're going and developing something cool on your own that you think other EIRs would be interested in, please share it with us, because we would love to feed that back out to the community. We are looking to create community with fellow EIRs. Again, if you have the time to, if you're looking at this and feeling like, oh my goodness, this is going to take way too much of my time, please don't feel pressured. It's absolutely there for the folks who are interested and have the bandwidth to take it on. Getting involved with the LinkedIn group. Lots of us are on LinkedIn anyway, so you can find us in the EIR program there. We're active on Twitter, and there's hashtag Team EIR, which is fun to look at and see what other EIRs and teachers are up to. And thank you to everyone who has already taken the time to tweet. We really appreciate it, because we love seeing what you're up to. Similarly, the Facebook page. Okay, so then there's the website. There is assistance to your workplace. So this is just a little bit of an if you need it sort of thing. This is not, I would say this is not obligatory. But if you need a letter for your employer to justify why you need to be out of work, why you need to be going away from your workplace, we will give that to you and explain your role as a volunteer. Now, what we've learned, again, and we've started to expand our work, but beyond the EIR program into partnering with companies, is that there's a real benefit to the business of what you're doing. So your employers are benefiting from your volunteer work. Even if they don't know it, they're really benefiting from it. So getting them to be aware of that, and maybe they decide, hey, I'm really glad I've got one EIR. I've got one of my employees who did this voluntarily. Maybe now that I understand what the program is, I want to mandate it, or I want to give them that time off, paid time, not make them use their vacation time. Maybe I want to donate some money to the program so that we can have more materials, that kind of thing. So there really is a benefit to the business in what you're doing. So I thank you on behalf of your employers, even if they're not thanking you, even if they're giving you a hard time about needing time off. It's very powerful what you're doing. And so on that note, the EIR program really is benefiting your company because the skills that you are either developing for the first time or you're strengthening through being part of the EIR program 100% make you more valuable as an employee. From coming up with ideas for lesson plans to negotiating how you'll do it, scheduling it with your teacher, refining the presentation you're going to give, thinking about your why as an engineer. All of that, it's great public speaking, it's great project management, it's great collaboration experience. It's pushing you out of your comfort zone. If the idea of getting up and speaking in front of children makes you a little nervous, that's great that you're going for it anyway. When you push yourself outside your comfort zone, you grow. And so you taking the time to do that on your own really does make you even more of an asset to your company. Giving back to the community. Some of you mentioned doing that on your own behalf just because you personally want to give back. But when you think about it, your company is also supporting you to do that. So they are also giving back to the community. And again, if they're interested in doing that on more of a systemic level, let's say they want to sponsor 10 EIRs, or maybe they want to give some money to the program to expand its size, then we would be willing to recognize them as an EIR sponsor. And then they would get formal recognition for giving back to the community in that way. Depending on your industry and your location, there may be a benefit in your company scoping out the local talent. Maybe by the time kids are, certainly by the time they're in high school, possibly by the time they're in upper year elementary, they're already thinking about, well, where am I going to live and where am I going to work? And if they have some local companies in mind and they have a sense of what those companies do, that's only going to do good things for building their talent pipeline. We spoke to a company that's interested in establishing themselves as a local employer of choice for local youth. And they said, we want the best and the brightest, and we want them to think of us first. So that's why they're investing and working with us, which is kind of a cool benefit. We didn't really think of that initially, but it makes sense from a business perspective if that's one of their priorities. And strengthening their brand. So there's sort of a community profile aspect to it. Obviously, the students are not the only ones who see those logos once they become a sponsor, once they become attached to the EIR program or to any of our Engineers of Tomorrow outreach work. They become leaders in the community. They become seen as they're giving back, they're doing the right thing, and that really does good things to their bottom line as well. So this is just a little mini pitch. We obviously, if you thought that your company was interested, we would be happy to go speak to leaders at your company, and we can make that approach. Okay, so here we are. I said that we'd be done by noon. It's 11:45, so I'm high-fiving myself over here. We are going to give you a break, but first I'd like to give you a couple of things to do. If you have not booked your first classroom visit, let's make it your goal to do that before we reconvene at 1 o'clock today. If you haven't already connected with us online, please go ahead and do that right now. It takes 5 seconds. Jump on your Facebook, your Twitter, or your LinkedIn and find us on there. Again, we sent out an email earlier this week encouraging you to exchange phone numbers with your match. So if you haven't done that already, please do so now. You might want to send them another email. That if you're not able to get in touch with them today, obviously you can put more. You can put something in the calendar maybe to follow up with them this week. Ideally, again, we'd be doing this in person, but this is the next best thing really, is to set aside that time for everyone to pick up the phone and to go exchange phone numbers and speak to your match. Go ahead. As soon as we get off the call here, call them, get in touch, and here are some questions that you can use. I'm going to put them up on the screen. Just a minute. Computer's not listening to me. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to resume at 1 p.m. and here are the questions for you to guide, to think about. So I'm going to leave this open. I'm going to stop recording and we are going to reconvene at 1 p.m. to carry on.